Good morning to our listeners here on Long Island's most listened to radio station, Walk 97.5. My name is Dan Leveler, president of New York State's largest independent labor union, Suffolk AME. It's a pleasure to welcome you to another episode of Suffolk Matters, where Suffolk County meets the men and women of Suffolk AME. Today, our guest is the presiding officer of the Suffolk County Legislature, Dwayne Gregory. Dwayne, welcome to the show.
Great. Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in with, let's talk about the midterm elections. We had some talk out there about a blue wave, and I think to some extent, there was some indication of change. But, what's your take on the midterms?
Well, some of the races are still undecided, but at this point, I think the Democrats in the House are up to 35 seats. There's a projection that they may gain 40 seats. It's a lot of women, first-time candidates that have been elected. So it's good to see some balance in Washington. I think some people are disappointed how things are going.
Right.
So it's interesting. I think it's certainly a good prelude to the 2020 elections, and I think those in Washington should be paying attention to what the voters are calling for. I think more calmness, less divisiveness, and working together and getting things done.
Yeah, never mind which party, just to see some of that shift in gender. There's so many across the world. Obviously, there are so many women that don't have their voices necessarily represented by someone who gets their issue on a firsthand level.
Right.
And to have someone, to have a man represent what it's like to be a woman, maybe a little disingenuous. So it's good to see that this country believes that female voices should be heard and considered as part of this process.
Oh, yeah, stepping up. I think, having a diversity in leadership and representation is a good thing. You have different perspectives and points of view that can lend a voice to the conversation and, bring change, a positive change, I think.
Yeah. And for all intents and purposes, hopefully raise issues in a way they haven't been raised before and come to the right conclusion,
Right, so. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, any surprising races in New York State?
Yeah, I tell you, I was a little bit surprised with the Campaign seat and Kevin Thomas. I've met him a few times. Very impressive.
Right.
But I think it's it's not surprising to say that race was not much on anyone's radar.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, the Democrats in the past have put up candidates and supported him, thinking that they were going to take Campaign out, but he's always withstood any challenge. And this year there wasn't a focus by the state Democrats, and he was able to really do a grassroots ground campaign and get the vote out. And so I think that was the big surprise on election night.
Yeah, no, that definitely a good one. We're very proud, and you might even be a little bit upset, so I apologize, but we're proud of the efforts of Legislator Martinez.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We I got some early indications that polling was doing well, and she's just terrific. She is a person that really is in it, the business of elected office, if I can call it that, for helping constituents. It's not about herself, not about her ego. She really dives in, hands on, and works tirelessly to help her constituents out. And she's going to do great in the state.
Sure, and we had her on as a guest, and I spoke to her fairly candidly, and just saying, in my estimation, there's a difference between the terms people use, the term politician versus an elected representative, and I think that Monica is, or I should say Legislator Martinez, is the quintessential elected representative.
Right.
She puts herself on the back burner, and it doesn't matter how hard she's got to work on an issue to get it done for her constituents, and that's what people want to elect.
Yep. Yeah. They're tired of people. The biggest complaint that I hear from voters is these politicians are in it for themselves, and and Monica's not that, and we need more people like her who are focused on the real issues.
And I think we should probably get into that a little bit more, and we will a little later in the show. But just focusing on your position as presiding officer and how that relates to now the open seat in the the ninth LD, right?
Yep, ninth LD.
So how long do you think that seat may sit open before a special election?
So we're having some conversations now with our council. We'll probably end up calling a special meeting of the legislature probably early to mid-January.
Right.
We haven't set on a final date yet, but we're looking for calling a special election probably late February sometime.
Okay.
So the legislature has to vote on it and first before we can call the election.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I think why that's important for our listeners is, your job is uniquely difficult in that you're the presiding officer of the entire legislature.
Mm-hmm.
So regardless of who's on what side of the aisle, you're tasked with getting things done, and now you're going to be losing someone from the Democratic side, and there may be, a little period of time where votes, if it's going to be a partisan issue, votes are going to be a little closer.
Right.
So
Yeah. It's always you always have to monitor that balance, and but while the special elections being called, the constituents of the district, they'll have people that they can reach out to with their concerns or constituent issues. So want to make sure that they understand that that they're that they won't be without service from the county.
That's a very important point. So even as the transition happens, the representation on the county side will still be there in terms of getting information back to the legislature on things that are happening in the 9th legislative district that need to be handled. So, yeah, that's a very good point.
Absolutely.
So let's get into, I don't want to say this the wrong way, and I know, on a certain level, I have some deep disappointment on this, but I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I don't want to steer the conversation one way or the other, although I guess I just did by mentioning my disappointment. But let's talk about the omnibus, that budget vote, and just as a little preamble, there's a working group inside the Suffolk County Legislature that gets together, reviews the entire proposed budget, and makes certain tweaks here and there based on what they see the district's needs, what they see that the county needs in terms of providing services, and is spending being done in the best way possible.
Right.
I think they did a tremendous job this year. I think the Office of Budget Review did a tremendous job this year. And when all is said and done, a $3.11 billion budget, it was proposed to add about $1.5 million on top of that, which is, again, sounds like a lot of money, but when compared to $3.11 billion, you could almost use the term de minimis. And then the vote happens, and rather than leading any more than I possibly have already done, I just like to get your take on it.
Yeah, it's having a bipartisan, what we call budget working group. There's 9 members in the working group. It's something that my predecessor, Bill Lindsay, felt was important, and we had continued to do since, so probably over 10 years now. Right. It's really a way to give the minority, a voice and a seat at the table. Yeah. In past years, the majority would just sit down, divvy things up, and it would just, fracture the legislature, and it was just highly partisan, and that's. Right. And that's not the best way to govern.
No.
So we really try to put forward each an attempt to have a bipartisan discussions when it comes to the budget. Everyone has constituents that they serve. All districts have needs. They may vary from district to district, but there are needs there, and and this year was no different than past years. Had members of the minority on the working group, and they sat there and they deliberated. They voted on discussions and decisions that we made, and certainly voiced their priorities for their specific constituents. Yeah. And unfortunately, they voted against the amendments that they supported in private discussions, which is frustrating.
Yes.
The budget document the budget process is somewhat a political thing. Everyone wants to create a political narrative that makes them look in the best political light, and that's understandable. We can get past that. But when you start making decisions against your own constituents because of political forces and things of that nature, you have to ask yourself, well, why are you in this business?
Yeah.
And that's what I've been doing.
Yeah.
Saying, well, because you invite someone to the budget working group, they can deny going there. They don't have to accept the invitation.
Sure.
But to sit there and vote against your own interests and participate in the process and that you're going to vote against, it to me is just not what our constituents are asking for.
No. And, so just touching a little bit more on what you've already spoken about, your predecessor created a mechanism to allow the budget to be reviewed democratically and not just by Democrats. When I say democratically, I mean that there would be voices on on both sides of the aisle involved in this process. And regardless of what side, Democrat or Republican in this working group this last time around, that working group passed the omnibus. They took it out of committee. They all voted in favor, and then it goes to a full vote. And this democratic process, it worked in the working group, and then it gets in front of the full legislature, and that's where it falls apart.
Right.
I think taxpayers are increasingly frustrated, specifically with ideas like, I'm going to vote party line because I'm going to vote party line. They weren't elected to do that. They were elected to represent the district, not the party. Right? They're a member of the party, but they need to go back to the party and say, this is what's going on in the district, and this is why this is happening. And I got to say, I'm just going to reiterate, it was very frustrating for me. And, I guess the term I've been using is because there was such a great idea, and one, I have to commend you on continuing with, of infusing democracy, small d democracy, into this process, and to have it turn into such a political, to some degree, you understand there's politics involved, like you said, but to have it kind of finally settle on just politics, I think that's a failure to act. And what I said, or I have been saying, is, in a sense, some of these people are rendering themselves irrelevant. If the legislature can't get the job done, you're going to go to someone else who can get the job done. And that's, you have elected representatives to get things done. So
absolutely. And I think, I think the point has gotten lost that this is very special. I don't know any town hall. I don't know any Albany doesn't do it. Washington doesn't do it. No level of government that I'm aware of where the majority invites the minority into the room to go over budget negotiations. I mean, they may do it separately and come together, but this is a cohesive joint process. And that's special, and we should embrace that, and we should be doing the best we can to ensure that remains intact. Because, I'm getting pressure from my colleagues to say, hey, we invite these guys here every year. And there used to be years when Republicans would vote for the budget that were, especially those in the budget working group. But now, the past several years, they've really taken a hard line and said, nope, I'm not going to. They'll sit in the room. We had one individual who asked for like $200,000 for organizations in his district and voted against, so you're literally voting against your own interests. And for, because of the party bosses, saying, hey, we can't give the Democrats a win. It's not giving us a win.
No.
This is for your constituents as well. So it's, I hope, my fear is that things are going to really get, partisan. And I hope that isn't the case, but that's my fear.
Me as well, and I think the taxpayers as well. And when you look at something that creates such a level of democracy that I think the voters want and really long for in this whole process, they want to know that people are doing what Suffolk County has been doing, where we're getting together, both sides of the aisle, in the same room at the same time,
Right.
and talking things out. That process worked great.
Right.
And then
right.
it failed in front of everybody. And now you talk about, the party boss. Let's just, let's look at one particular party. If you look on the Republican side, they voted against, one, their work product, and two, against the changes that the legislature was trying to make on a budget presented by a Democratic administration.
Right.
So, in fact, you supported a Democratic agenda.
Right.
And that becomes confusing and frustrating. And I understand there's always something more going on, but the optics are it's partisan, it's political, and we're taking this great thing that nobody else has done. We're taking this experiment in government and trying to make it what people really want it to be, and we're kind of blowing it up.
Right. Yeah. And what makes it, when I voice that same argument, say, hey, you guys you're in effect, because if the process is the county executive submits the budget, his recommended budget to the legislature reviews it, we can adopt it outright, or leave it alone and it comes into effect. But we generally amend it slightly, and that's what this process that we were trying to do is. So if we fail to amend our amendments to the recommended budget, in effect, the county executive's budget goes into effect. And some of them may think, well, I'm not voting for any. I was like, well, they do have the ability to submit their own amendments to both, and they have failed to do it. So they, in effect, are voting for the county executive's budget because they have failed to put their own amendments forward, which they're perfectly entitled to do. And it's just, it's just horrible. I mean, I had some conversations with folks who said they received calls from Republican, some of my Republican colleagues, asking them to vote for the budget they were going to vote against, because it was going to keep funding in for organizations in their districts, but they wanted the political benefit of voting against it.
And that is the frustration there.
Yep.
So they know that they need to get a yes vote to achieve for the people that they represent.
Right.
They refuse to act on their own, so they petition other people to vote on their behalf.
Right. I could not imagine a party leader or a colleague of mine saying, hey, we got to vote against things that are against your constituents. But that's all right. The other side will vote for it, so you can look tough fiscally, and you'll get the benefit of getting the funding anyway. Like, I can imagine putting myself in that situation. Well, that experiment failed this year. They're not getting the funding that they want, and they look foolish for inserting partisanship in a process that we're trying. And I'm not going to name names, but during this process, one of the individuals in the room said, hey, you guys are thank you, for doing what you're doing. I said, we try not to make this a partisan process.
Right.
We understand you have constituents just like we do. We want to help you out as best we can.
Right.
And the thanks we get is like, screw you. That's
essentially.
Exactly.
And, again, as presiding officer, your objective is to make sure that everybody can come together and find consensus to do what's best for everyone in Suffolk County.
Right. Yep.
And it doesn't matter what district. It doesn't matter, the economics, any demographic considerations. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
All of Suffolk County needs to be considered, and to have people, vote against the voters who put them in office for a partisan appearance, because they actually needed the work product done.
Yeah.
They believed in it when it was in the working group, enough to pass it through the working group and bring it to a full vote, and then for optics and solidarity, vote it down. And that's frustrating.
Yeah, and it's we're talking about monies for youth programs, money for food pantries, food for families that are poor, gang prevention programs, drug, we have a opioid heroin epidemic, monies for those types of programs that, we're one of the, highest numbers in the state when it comes to overdoses for heroin opioid epidemic. And then not even speaking of, the important stuff that we, did in the budget, including, mercy dispatchers and jail medical nurses and more caseworkers for, child protective services. I mean, God forbid something happens, with the child and abused child, and we don't have, enough caseworkers to really do the work in a diligent manner, and they do tremendous work. Don't get me wrong, but there was a request to do more so we can lower those case numbers for individuals, and that's the sensitive nature of the work that we do. There's an impact. There is an impact in the choices that we make, and I hope you don't realize those negative consequences.
No, and again, I'm probably more comfortable saying this than anyone else. Not really trying to be a doomsday predictor, but odds are it's not a question of if, but when. So when we talk about child protective services and we talk about abuse and neglect for human beings that are too small, inexperienced, and capable of taking care of these issues on their own, the government does a great thing, and they provide the ability to help out in those situations. But when there aren't enough caseworkers, to me, it's not a question of if, but when something goes bad, and we're all going to have to live. I do everything I can. That we talk about this all the time. I do everything we can to make sure that staffing levels are where they are and that the programs are funded so that we don't realize this situation. I don't want to be in the newspaper saying, I think this was a preventable situation. You don't want to do that. I don't think anyone on the executive side wants to do that. And that's the important work that's being done here, is trying to balance all of these issues. And that's why I'm so frustrated, because we had a shot at, and let's be honest, all we had a shot at as part of this whole process was adding funding.
Right.
It didn't mean the jobs were going to be there. There's still work to be done after the fact. So all the legislators had to do was come together and say, yes, we want to make sure that we carve out a little bit so that we can do the things that are necessary. But then there's still work to be done between the union and the administration, and from the executive's office down to the department level. There's lots of conversations that have to be had, and this small part of it was just to say, here's a couple of bucks to make sure that if you guys can get to a yes, it's funded.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, and you guys do a great job advocating for what the needs are in the various departments, and it's important to have that relationship, to kind of that communication, so that we can address them, because there's 9,000 employees. We're spread out over 300 buildings in the county, and we as legislators and elected officials, we can't be expected to know everything that goes on, every need there is in every department, and that's you have your your union members in every area, and them there you have your process where they voice those concerns and needs, and it's important that we have that communication.
Yeah, and I agree. There's value, I think, to both sides, because you want to know, your colleagues want to know if there is a situation, and you want to be able to act on it.
Right.
And here's an excellent example. Again, I'm beating a dead horse here, but here's an excellent example of us coming forward and saying, here's how you can help. Here's something that we can do. And I got a phone call that said, listen, if I'm going to vote against this, I just want you to know it's not because I don't support you guys. And I said, don't kid yourself. That is exactly what you would be doing, is not supporting us. Our members can't eat promises.
Right.
There has to actually be food on the plate. I'm speaking very metaphorically here. The county's not in the business of providing our members with food. What I mean to say is, our guys do a tremendous job. But they're shoveling against the tide, so to speak. I look at an issue like custodial, and that's something that was another thing that was in this. There was 168 back in 2012 custodial personnel, maintenance personnel. We're now down to active 53, More than half of that is mandated just to the court buildings. So you have several handfuls of guys maintaining, according to the budget, 3.1 million square feet of grounds. It is tough to keep up with that. It's not like those guys are doing a bad job and things look a little shoddy because of that.
Right.
They're doing an amazing job, but there's so few people,
Right.
and that becomes a health and safety concern.
Yes.
You know, a spilled cup of coffee in a lobby, somebody slips, that's going to cost the county. Look at some of the things that you guys deal with now on the capital side of things, the improvements that need to be made and all the expenses that go into. We have conversations, should it be done in-house, should it be done out-of-house?
Right.
Those are the things we're talking about, but we wouldn't even be having those conversations if the maintenance was handled. And these guys start out at an annual rate, take-home pay about $19,000. So we're not asking for $100,000 a head and 100 employees.
Right.
We asked for 10 to
Right.
just alleviate some of the pressure and cover the fact that some people are going to have a sick day.
Right.
You know, they're going to have an event in their family where, you know, a kid's recital or, a family emergency where, you know, someone's got to, you know, watch after a family member or whatever else. The work still has to get done.
Absolutely, and I'm a big proponent of, you know, you walk into a building, you know, your first impression, you know, and we have to be cognizant of that. You know, not everyone is let's say a big fan of government or believes that government is a mechanism for good.
Right.
But it certainly doesn't help when someone walks into a building. It's, you know, it looks unkept. There's trash all over the place, and you know, if you don't get the warmest welcome from
Right.
you know, it's like, you know, we're in a customer service,
Sure.
you know, in many respects, and because we're in government doesn't mean that, you know, we don't deserve to live in a clean and
Right.
and tidy work environment.
Right.
You know, that's respective. To me, that only reflects the value that we put in the county taxpayer dollars.
Sure.
That we were investing it wisely, we were keeping it, you know, in our investment, and we're appreciative of the support of the public.
And that's something you and I have talked about. You know, on the first level of this discussion, you know, we have some employees that are overworked and shoveling against the tide. On the second level, we have employees working in those buildings, and they have concerns with how the place is maintained. But on that third level, and I think it's a very important one to remember, taxpayers are frustrated. I think they're going to be more frustrated next year when you see certain changes to the federal tax code starting to hit people. When you walk into a county building and you don't see what you're expecting, you know, your confirmation bias kicks in. These people are bad with the money. I'm paying so much in taxes. I'm not getting the refund I'm expecting. And it has an impact of what they think the entirety of their tax bill is going to. And not everybody is an expert on what sliver of the budget goes towards custodial and maintenance,
Right.
versus, you know, everything else.
Yeah,
So-
no, yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and you know, and I hear it all the time. You know, if you know, someone goes to, you know, a beach and they go to the bathrooms and the bathrooms aren't kept. You know, when I was a kid in high school and part of college, you know, I worked at Heckscher State Park,
Right.
and I worked in the pool area. And you know, we worked diligently to make sure. My brother and I worked there together. I have an identical twin brother.
Yeah.
And we cleaned the bathroom, and it wasn't a pleasant job. All the diapers and stuff like that. But it was important that
Yes.
hey, you know, people come here, they should get, you know, a clean environment. You know,
Yeah.
and we should do that with every county facility.
It is.
Or
It
government
is part.
facility.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
It is part of the experience,
Yep.
and it's maybe on some level subconsciously affects whether or not you think good things are being done on all levels in government.
Yep.
And this is, you know, just an aspect of the face of government.
Yeah.
So, and you know, again, we talk about the numbers and everything else. Out of a $3.11 billion budget, 10 custodians, not a heavy lift.
Right. No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I just want to thank you for coming down and speaking to me today, and to all of our listeners, letting them know a little bit about the process. And I apologize for monopolizing a little bit of the time. I know my frustration is showing through, but I want to say that you know, at the end of the day, I really appreciate everything you do to operate in a bipartisan fashion, and those of your colleagues that, again, they make their decisions based on what's right. It's a heart and head decision versus what does the party want. So thank you again for joining us.
Great.
Pleasure to have you here. And thanks again to our listeners for tuning in. And we'll see you next week on Suffolk Matters here on Long Island's most listened to radio station, Walk 97.5.